Hello everyone, welcome to our Egyptian online seminar group. First, keep your phones off. Then, if you have any questions, you can ask our speaker during his presentation or after his presentation. I have great pleasure of welcoming dear Professor Gilles Hilary. Gilles Hilary is a professor of accounting at Georgetown University. His research interests including the economic analysis of information and the contracts, as well as behavioral economics. His work has been published in top-ranking journals such as the Accounting Review, the Journal of Accounting and Economics, the Journal of Accounting Research, the Journal of Finance, the Journal of Financial Economics and Management Science. He holds a PhD from the University of Chicago. Now we will start our seminar with dear Professor Gilles Hilary.
Well, hello. So thank you very much for this introduction, and thank you very much, Mohammed, for inviting me to give this presentation today. I'm going to present this paper, Political Earnings Management Ahead of Congressional Elections. This is joint work with Young Chen and Kai-Wai Hoi. Young is a PhD student at the University of Hong Kong. She's finishing her PhD. She's on the market this year, so if you're looking for a smart colleague, you may want to contact her. And then Kai is also at the University of Hong Kong, but is a full professor over there. All right. So just like Mohammed said, if you have questions, by all means, feel free to jump in, interrupt, ask me to clarify. I don't really see the chat, so just feel free to interrupt if you have questions. Okay. We will have a main question in this paper and then a couple of ancillary one. So the main question we're asking is whether firms exercise their discretion in accounting choices during election years to facilitate the re-election of local representatives. Okay, and at the risk of killing the suspense, the answer is going to be yes. So we are going to call this behavior political earnings management. Okay, and then we will ask two related questions. Okay, essentially trying to answer, the broader question of why this is happening. Okay, so do firms benefit from this behavior, and do politicians benefit from this behavior? Another way of saying this is, are electoral results affected by the accounting behavior? Okay, and there's obviously a lot of work on earnings management. There is less work on earnings management in a political context. But that specific angle, that specific channel of accounting numbers influencing electoral results in the US is perhaps less researched. Okay, so that's one area where we hope this paper is going to contribute, trying to clarify the link between accounting behavior and electoral results. Okay. The results will be pretty dense. We have a lot of tables, we have a lot of results, so I figure out I would start perhaps with sort of a summary, and of course the main questions and ancillary questions. That's what we were just discussing. And so, yes, so I was saying, it might be useful to present a summary of the results to make sure that not losing the audience, because it's pretty dense on the result side. So we are going to find that firms manage earnings upward ahead of re-elections of representatives. Okay, we are going to find that the results are more pronounced when firms are less constrained by outside monitoring, prior accounting choices, social costs. We are going to find that they're also more pronounced when firms can extract more benefits. Okay? So, for example, the earnings are more salient, or the local labor conditions are bad. We are going to find that they're also more pronounced when firms engage in other corporate political activities, such as lobbying, for example. Okay? we are going to find that firms that do engage in this behavior do receive some benefits in the form of subsidies or governmental contracts after the elections. Okay. And then we are going to find that earnings in general and the manipulation in particular is going to influence the electoral results. And again, we're going to find that this is more true when the information is more salient, when people pay more attention, and when local labor markets are worse. Okay. We're also going to find that those two dimensions are related because people pay more attention when local labor conditions are bad. Okay. So that's essentially what I'm going to explain in the next few minutes. And again, feel free to ask questions at any point. Before I get to the paper per se, since this is an international audience, I thought I would give a brief overview of the political American system so that we're all on the same page. Many people are likely to be familiar with that, but maybe not everyone, right? So the US is a federation. So you've got three levels of governments. The federal level, where you're going to find the president, the US Congress. The state level, where you're going to find governors and state Congress. And then local governments where, mayor, sheriffs, and a host of local governmental people will be elected. Okay. So in this paper, we're going to focus on the federal level. In part because dealing with local governments is pretty complicated by the fact that there are a lot of idiosyncratic legal elements, and it's going to be very hard to compare jurisdictions in a broad sample. And states also suffer from this to some extent. So at the federal level, you've got three branches: the judicial branch, that would be the Supreme Court; the executive branch, that would be the president and the vice president; and the legislative branch, that would be the Congress. Congress itself is divided into two chambers: the House of Representatives and the Senate. Okay. We are going to focus on the House of Representatives. Okay. Now, what is this chamber doing, and why we're focusing on this as opposed to governors or senates? Well, it is a pretty, big assembly, 435 members. So that's going to give us more observations, essentially, especially when it gets to the electoral part. Right? People are elected every 2 years on schedule. Okay, and the schedule is exogenous. It's decided by laws, before the election is set. So it's different from, say, the British or the Canadian system, where the prime minister can call for elections. The timing is exogenous, relatively frequent. And the assembly has different roles, right? So at the most basic level, it is to pass laws, but also to monitor the executive branch. And to some extent, it has some influence on the administrative side of things, right? So you can write to your representative and say, I applied to this. The government or the administration has not processed my application. Can you speed up things? Okay, and so there's a limited but actual administrative role that representative will play. So important, relatively large, elections on regular basis, on fixed schedules, and they have broad implications for the inhabitants. Okay. So that's why we are going to focus on this group of people in terms of electoral outcome. So what would decide the outcome of a representative election? Well, to some extent, it's a national election because they all happen at the same time. So, how the economy is doing at the national level, whether people are happy with the current president, that's going to be obviously a factor in people's decision. And prior research in political science has shown that the economic situation in particular will have an effect on national elections. But at the same time, it's also a local election, right? Because it's decided at the district level. So local elements are likely to play a role as well in the election of, or the re-election of candidates. The person itself, his or her characteristics will be important, but how the district is doing is also going to be important, right? So the economic situation in the district, independently from the broader economic landscape, is going to be an important factor. Okay. And that can be explained for a host of reasons, right? So employees and shareholders are disproportionately local. Customers spend more when local firms are doing well. There's a new paper on this. Firms donate more to local charities when they're doing well. So it's important for the local economy that the local firms, the big ones in particular, are doing well, okay? Because that will contribute to the local welfare, to the local happiness, and therefore to the electoral results. One of my papers, for example, suggests that employees are, happier when they see surprisingly good financial performance. Now, employees are also electors, so you would expect that would translate in more votes when local employers are doing well. So that's essentially the intuition behind the importance of the economic performance of local firms. Now, if the performance of local firm is important, politicians will care about that dimension, okay? And they would hope that local firms can help them to present a better, a more rosy picture right before the elections, okay? And that's where the earnings management is going to kick in. We believe it's a natural way to present the economic situation of those firms in a better light when politicians care about this, okay? Now, whenever you do earnings management, there are costs associated with this, right? Because if you go too far, it's potentially illegal, but even if you don't go that far, it may hurt your reputation. So the question becomes, why would a firm decide to help a local politician? Okay. And there are several reasons why we would expect this to be the case, because elected officials have different ways to return the favor. Okay, so there's already a literature on political contributions, for example, and that literature has essentially shown that when you contribute money to politicians, all kind of good things will happen to you. You will have better access to government funds. You're less likely to be subject to SEC enforcement. Your tax situations will improve, and probably a host of other dimensions. Okay, so the fact that officials can help firms has already been established, but largely in the context of political contributions, much less in the context of earnings management designed to, help representative to be reelected. Okay. And so we are going to look at specific dimensions, subsidies, governmental contracts, and to some extent, visas. So essentially, our main hypothesis here is that firm performance is an important determinant of election outcome. that should lead to a de facto collusion with politicians, where firms will improve their reported performance, for example, through earnings management, and then politicians will reciprocate. Now, I presented the reasons why we think that that should happen, but we recognize that to some extent, this is an empirical issue. Because, for example, voters may not be informed enough about the economic situation of local firms, or sophisticated enough to understand the implications of earnings for their welfare. Okay? So that's one reason it might be ineffective. Another reason is that even if firms want to help politicians, they can help them to other channels. So they can make political donations, for example, or they can hire a lot of people ahead of elections. And there's already some support in the literature suggesting that this is happening. So the question that we ask as accountants is, okay, is there a specific rule for accounting in general and earnings in particular in this picture? And I think the literature has not explored that dimension as much. So how are we going to look at this? We are going to start with the simple regressions, where we're going to regress earnings management on a dummy for whether the year is an actual year, and then a host of controls. Okay. Earnings management, we are going to start with the version proposed by Carthari et al. In 2005, but we are going to do a lot of robustness tests, and we're going to find that the results are not conditioned by the specific proxy that we use. Pretty much any proxy we have considered has given us the same results. The dummy, so remember how it works, right? So you've got elections every 2 years, right? Okay, so that's going to reflect this. But the dummy is going to be won only if there is an election year and there is an incumbent. So the idea is that if you portray a better picture of the economic situation of the district, you're going to help the representative for that district. But if there is none, in the sense that the one who was representing the district retired or passed away, or is not running again, then it's not clear to whom the benefit would accrue. Okay, so elect year is one if there is an election year and there is an incumbent. Otherwise, it's 0. Okay. So we're going to start with that, and then we're going to build on that framework. And then we're going to control for things. So we have, I think, a pretty long list of controls here. Not sure I want to go through all of them. Many of them are firm level controls. Those are the one on the left and the column on the left. And then some of them are more specific to either the district or the politician. For example, the GDP growth in the county, the unemployment in the district, EPU, that's a measure of political uncertainty, VIX, that's a measure of economic uncertainty, and then we're going to look at the ideology of the local representative and whether firms are connected. And then, in robustness tests, we're going to consider other variables as well, and we're going to find that they don't really matter. Okay. So first results, right? So outcome of the first regression. So in the first column here, we do not have any controls. We just have the fixed effects, the firm fixed effects and the district fixed effect. Okay. We can have both because firms relocate and because districts are the borders of the districts change every so often. That's why we can have both in the same regression. And we do find that when it's a year ahead of an election, you're more likely to see some earnings management. That's true when we add the controls and drop the fixed effects. That's also true when we have both the controls and the fixed effects at the same time. Okay. And we see that the coefficient doesn't vary that much, which is an informal test suggesting that perhaps we don't have an important omitted variable in this specification. So that's the baseline results. Like I said, we're going to do a host of robustness tests to make sure that this is not driven by some econometric issues. So we have a long list of alternative measures of earnings management. It's a bit fastidious, I think, if I go through all of them, but I think we have covered most of the at least recent variables in the literature. If we miss one, we're happy to look at it. Now, it's a two-step estimation process, right? So, because first you have to estimate the earnings management, and then you plug that in the regressions that looks at the effect of earnings of electoral competition. So that comes with some econometric issues. The good news is that that's not driving our results here. Okay. There might be a concern that maybe we should drop some firms, like firms that relocate to another district, those that receive subsidies, firms from the utility or financial sectors. That doesn't affect our results. Okay. We have different level of clustering, different types of fixed effects. Someone suggested we should control for NS coverage. That doesn't affect our results either. And then perhaps more importantly, we control for a host of economic variables, right? State level unemployment rate, the change in employment rate, the rate in the next year, the percentage change in sales and employment for establishments within the county, or significant hiring or layoff. A significant hiring or layoff is one where at least 100 people are either made redundant or hired in the same year. We tried 1,000 and we got the same results, right? Because obviously one concern that we have is that maybe the accruals are reflecting the economic situation, and the economic situation is affected by elections. So our first line of defense is to try to control for all possible dimensions of this economic situation and show that that does not affect our conclusion. Okay. So that's kind of the table 3, if you will, of the paper, the first main set of results. One thing that we do as well is that we run a placebo test in a sample of districts where there is an election, but there is no incumbent. And there we do not find any effect. Okay. So again, we want to tie this to the political dimension as opposed to the electoral cycle per se, or the broader economic conditions. And that placebo test is helping us to become confident that that's indeed a political aspect that we are capturing, not a broader situation. And then we do a long series of comparative statics. So I'm going to go through all of them in details, but that's what we're going to be looking at in the next few slides. Now, those tests are quite important. They are important because again, there is this concern that what we're picking up is general economic conditions or uncertainty, or more generally some omitted variable that is correlated with the election in the district. Okay, and so what we're going to do to minimize the risk that this is explaining our baseline results is we're going to run all those comparative statics, because then any omitted variable would have to be conditionally correlated with our variable of interest to explain our results. So it's plausible that different variables are unconditionally correlated with our variable of interest. It is more difficult to come up with the story where the variable is conditionally correlated. And I think it becomes really difficult to find one that is consistent with all the comparative statics at once. Okay, so finding an alternative explanation for one test, I suspect it's possible, but finding an explanation that match all the conditional results, that's going to be more difficult. Okay. All right. So what do we find there? Well, we're going to start with the constraints. Okay, and we're going to say, okay, if it's political earnings management in the sense that we have, explained before, when you get more constraints on this political earnings management, you should see less of it. Okay. So we're going to get a series of partitioning variables, and then we're going to run split sample analysis, and we're going to hope that the results are stronger when you got weaker constraints. So the first split sample that we're going to consider is the distance to the SEC. Okay. So prior research has shown that firms that are further away from the SEC are less monitored, because it's harder for the SEC to get to those firms, right? So we split the sample based on this dimension, and we find that the effect is stronger when the firm is further away from an SEC office, right? And so that's important because that gets to the notion of monitoring. If we thought that our baseline results were driven by faithful representation of the economic situation, we would not expect this variable to be significant. To the extent it was significant, it would be the other way around, where when you're more closely monitored, you make sure you reflect the economic situation of the firm, right? So that partition is not consistent with this alternative interpretation. Okay. Then we're going to look at the second one, net operating assets. That's constraints from prior accounting decisions. And we find that when you're less constrained by your past decisions, then you're able to do more political earnings management. The third one is a culture of corruption. So we look at whether corruption is more or less common in the state, and the general idea is that if it's not socially acceptable to engage in that type of practice, there are additional social costs in engaging in this quid pro quo with the local politicians, right? And that's essentially what we find. I think there's a typo here. It should be flipped. We find that the effect is stronger in an environment where corruption is more common. So, nutshell, when the constraints are weaker, you see more of this earnings management. Okay. So, more in the sense of a manipulation than a reflection of the actual economic situation of the firm. And then we're going to look at the benefits. Okay? And we're going to look at different dimensions, but the first one we're going to look at is seniority. The more senior you are in the House of Representatives, the more you can deliver for your constituents or whoever you choose to help. Okay, so maybe you're more likely to incur the cost of earnings management if you expect the politician to be able to help you more. That's what we find. Okay. Of course, you need to convince the representative to help you. Okay, and so we were thinking about what would be a good measure of the bargaining position of the firm, and we thought one way to capture that might be to look at how relevant you are to the district. So the second partition you see on the screen here is based on the number of employees working at the headquarters. When more employees are working in the district, you're likely to be more important and in return get more benefits. That's kind of what we see here. When you're more locally relevant, you're more likely to engage in earnings management ahead of re-elections. The next set of partitions will be based on labor market conditions, right? So we're going to find later when we look at what drives the electoral results that one very important thing is the labor market conditions, and in particular, whether there was a lot of firings during the year. And so if firms are in a positions where they have to fire people, they may want to soften the blow because that will have a big impact on the electoral results. And that's what we find here. When there's massive firing in the district, so not necessarily by the firm under consideration, but by all firms in the district, you find that earnings management is more common. The flip side of that is when there's massive hiring, maybe there's less of a need to do this, and that's what we find, right? You see less earnings management ahead of re-elections when a lot of local firms are hiring. So there's kind of a substitute at the district level between earnings management and labor decisions. And then the last set of partitions that we're going to consider is whether voters pay attention to the financial news. And so we're going to focus on two partitioning variables here. The local number of downloads of 10Ks for local firms. Okay, so local people downloading 10Ks of local firms, okay? Not 10Ks in general, but local firms, local people. And what we find is that when people pay more attention to financial news, local firms engage in more earnings management. Okay. Another channel that we consider is the press, the local press. There's a fair bit of variation in the US in terms of how active the local press is. And what we find is that when there's a greater local readership in the local press, then earnings management is more common. The idea here is that the local press would talk more about local firms and make the issue more salient in voters' mind. Okay. And again, that's what we find here. All right, so we find that there is political earnings management ahead of re-elections. Okay. We find that this is less common when constraints are stronger, but more common when the expected benefits are higher. We have already seen that there might be a substitute between hiring decisions and earnings management decisions. What about other political activities, right? So if you're engaged in political contributions or in lobbying, is that a substitute? Is that a complement? Is this like killing our results? So we are next going to partition our baseline samples on 3 or 4 dimensions. The first one is whether the firm is engaged in political contributions. And we do find that when a firm does that, it's also more likely to engage in earnings management. So now we see a complementary relationship between the two. But you notice that even among the firms that do not contribute to political candidates as much, you still see an effect that is very significant. Okay, so yes, it's a complement, but no, it doesn't kill our results. Okay, Another way you could be politically engaged is through the hiring of connected directors. Right? There's literature on that shows that if you hire the right directors, you will get all kind of benefits as well. Okay. Again, we split the sample, and we do find that yes, if you're politically active in the form of hiring connected directors, you're going to engage more in political earnings management. But even if you don't, the effect remains significant. And then last dimension, lobbying. Lots of firms, most firms, virtually all firms engage a lobbyist in the US. But you could hire, large lobbying firms, or you could hire a more modest firm. So, if I had to give an analogy, it's like a big four, non-big four kind of thing if we were talking about auditors, right? And what we find is that when you hire a more sophisticated lobbying firm, you're more likely to engage in political earnings management. But even if you don't do this, you still engage in political earnings management. Now, conditional on having a lobbyist, does that matter if the lobbyist is connected to the local politician? And this is what the last column is trying to answer here. And the answer is yes. If the lobbyist has a lot of interaction, so we're talking about the person this time, has a lot of interaction with the candidates, then we see that there's much more political earnings management. This time, if you engage a lobbyist who do not have a lot of personal connections with the local politicians, you do not see the earnings management effects. Okay, so this aspect where you're able to sort of talk to the politicians, to presumably coordinate, is going to be important, right? Now, when I say talk to the politicians, it'll be through a lobbyist, okay? And when I say coordinates, it would be probably illegal if it was an explicit contract, but you could imagine all kind of conversations happening behind closed doors that may or may not break the law, right? Okay, but takeaway from this table is that if you're politically active, you're more likely to engage in earnings management, especially if you're connected with the representative. But if you're not, you're still going to do that to a lower extent. All right. So we see that this political earnings management is happening more often where it should and less often where it should not happen. That's kind of the main questions. But, okay, are we sure that the interpretation is correct? Well, one thing that would help us to make sure that it's correct is to show that it happens where firms would expect more benefits and that they do get those benefits. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at industries. And we're going to look at whether they happen in industry, whether earnings management, political earnings management, is more likely to happen in industries where you would expect the benefit to be greater. Right? And so we're going to look at 4 dimensions. First, we're going to look at what happens when a local politician that is affiliated with the firm is losing his or her seat. And we're going to look at the market reactions in that case. So a person passes away, loses the election. What we observe is that there's a negative market relations, but it varies across industries. Okay. What we find is that political earnings management is more common in industries that react more badly to the loss of an affiliated politician. Okay. Then we're going to look at 3 specific dimensions. Concentration, where if an industry is more concentrated, then antitrust is more likely to be a concern. Okay, so we would expect earnings management to be more salient in that case because you need your politicians more. Industries that rely on H-1B visas. Okay, so if you're not in the U.S. or even if you're in the U.S., I guess you may not really familiar with this. H-1B visas are visas that allow people to immigrate to the U.S. if they have skills, technical skills. Okay, but there is a cap every year, and you still have to go through a process. And so representative can play a role at two levels. One, they can sort of lobby Congress to increase that cap, and then they can contact the department in charge of processing those visas, make sure that the visa for this person is not stuck somewhere. Okay. We're going to find that industries that rely more on H-1B visas also engage in more political earnings management. And then the last one is perhaps the most intuitive. If your industry is doing a lot with the governments in terms of contracts, then the incentives to ingratiate yourself with politicians is greater. And we're going to find this as well. Right. So the earnings management activity is more prominent in industries where it's important. It's more important to have good contacts with the governments. Now, do actual firms get anything out of that? And the answer is yes. Right. So we are going to look at two things: subsidies and government contracts. So the first thing we're going to do, which is not on this table, is to see if earnings management in general is going to get you there. And the answer is no. So earnings management on average doesn't get you more subsidies or governmental contracts. But if you do earnings management ahead of a re-election year when there's an incumbent, then that gets you there. Okay, that's what we find in this in this table here, right? That the effect is concentrated in the setting that we are considering. And then we've got the last part of the paper, right? So we see that earnings management is happening. We think it's more a manipulation than reflection of economic situation. We see that it's happening more where it should be happening. We have shown that then firms engaged in this behavior do benefit from this behavior. What about the politicians? Do they get anything in returns? And so that's the last specification where we're going to regress election loss, losing the re-election campaign, on the accounting performance of firms in your district, controlling for things. So controlling for GDP growth in the district, unemployment in the districts, returns of firms located in the district, political uncertainty at the national level, seniority of the politician, ideology of the politician, whether the election is going to be close or not, and whether the firms in the districts are connected to the politician. And so what we see on this screen here is that, yes, earnings are going to be important when people cast their votes, okay? And so if there's a drop in earnings, that's going to affect the likelihood of losing the re-election campaign. So that's what you see in the first three columns, with different specifications, with controls, without controls, with fixed effects, without fixed effects, okay? And so, yes, accounting does matter. Okay. And then what you see in the last column here is we're going to break that down between the average earnings management and the rest of the earnings change. Okay. And we do find that the specific components of earning changes that is a link to the earnings management is going to have an effect on election losses. All right. So the manipulation that we have observed, in the first part of the study, essentially matters when it comes time to observe electoral results. Now, again, we are going to look at subsamples, hopefully find effects that are stronger where they should be, and we're going to consider different dimensions to measure this, right? So one dimension would be whether people pay attention. So we split the sample on whether there are many local downloads of 10Ks for local firms or not. And you find in the left part of the table that the effect on the electoral results is stronger, in fact, is concentrated when local people pay attention to the local accounting performance of firms, so the accounting performance of local firms. Okay. So that's one way to measure saliency. Okay. Another way of measuring saliency is to say, okay, a lot of those 10Ks, they come earlier in the year, right? So the election is normally in November, maybe between February, March, and November, people have forgotten what's going on. And that would be actually the right intuition. What you see on the right part of the table here is we had an interaction between the change in earnings and the percentage of firms that announced their earnings close to the elections. And what you find here is that the effect is concentrated.
Mr. Jian?
Yeah.
A question from David?
Sure. You want to go ahead, David?
Hi, Gilles. Thanks for taking my question. I'm very intrigued by your paper. I learned a lot. My question is about the trade-offs managers face when trying to curry favor with incumbent politicians. I really like the narrative you had about how they're selecting from a menu of options, including employment, including political campaign contributions, and including in this narrative earnings management. I'm interested in learning more about the substitution or the complementarity of these types of managerial actions. And I thought one way by which you might more closely examine the extent to which these substitute for one another would be using the Citizens United and Speech Now court rulings in 2010, which really took the lid off of political campaign contributions for corporations. And that would be a setting where the firm's ability to engage in political campaign contributions became much easier, and maybe allow you to see whether or not your effect attenuates after firms now have this more direct way of supporting an incumbent candidate's political campaign. And so my prior there is that you would find a weaker reliance on accruals-based earnings management when political campaign contributions became more available to the firm. Moreover, I think you've said you've documented also real activities manipulation, where there was some kind of increase in production costs or some kind of reduction in discretionary expenditures and so on to orchestrate the appearance of additional profits. Because we consider real activities manipulation more costly than accruals-based earnings management, it would also be really interesting if you documented that after political campaign contributions became uncapped in 2010, that you saw a bigger decline in firms' engagement in real activities management, which is more costly than accruals-based earnings management. So anyway, just an encouragement about to look maybe a little bit more deeply at the trade-off managers face when choosing, from their menu of options about how to support an incumbent politician.
I think those are very good suggestions. We can indeed look at that. Yes, we can look at that. The only issue maybe is that we have a lot of results, and we have like page limits in terms of like submissions. So I don't. We will have to drop other things probably, but we can certainly look at that because I think your suggestion is making a lot of sense here. So thank you for that.
If I can make one more comment before I have to go, I have a job market talk downstairs momentarily for a candidate here. My view of this literature, the political cost literature, is that we have dozens of papers that talk about how managers orchestrate the appearance of earnings or use discretion to orchestrate the appearance of higher or lower earnings to either avoid political costs or get some kind of political concession. What is really interesting to me about your papers is you are showing some evidence that these discretionary activities are actually triggering economic benefits for the firm. And that's really what's missing in these dozens of papers. We have these vague notions of incentives, and we show that managers are responding to these incentives, but rarely do we show that their decisions actually trigger economic gains ex post. And so for me, like that EM and rewards table that you just showed, that to me is table 4, because that's not in the literature currently, where we don't have much evidence that these discretionary choices are triggering gains for the firms, for managers. And so I would love to see that more prominent in the paper.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. So again, feel free to jump in anytime you have questions or comments or suggestions, right? Right. So we were on that table, right, showing that essentially it happens when local inhabitants pay more attention to accounting numbers, and even more so when those numbers are later in the year, closer to the election. Okay. We are going to redo this with readership. Okay. And we are going to find that, similar things, right? So essentially, when there's a greater readership, then that has a greater effect on electoral results. Okay. So when earnings are more salient, they are more impactful. We are also going to look at labor market conditions, right? And that will sort of mirror the results we had earlier, that you see more earnings management when the labor conditions are worse. Here, what we see is that the effect on the electoral results is also more significant when labor market conditions deteriorate. So when you see a lot of firing, this is where the earnings management matters more. And again, you see the interaction with close percentage of firms that released 10Ks right before the election. Okay, so the two are kind of speaking to each other. We looked at firings, we looked at hirings, and we find the opposite results. The effect is much less significant when a lot of firms are hiring a lot of people, then people don't really voters don't really pay attention to earnings management at this point, or earnings performance at this point, because they're just happy that massive hirings are going on. And so I think that leads us to the last table in the paper that looks at whether the attention to accounting numbers also increases when labor market conditions are bad, local labor market conditions are bad. And so this time the dependent variable is the number of 10K downloads. So again, this is the local downloads by people about local firms, right? And we see that when there's a lot of firings, then people suddenly pay more attention to 10Ks. UMR, that's the unemployment level, when unemployment is rising, they pay more attention. Conversely, when there's a lot of hiring, they pay less attention. We can't have firings and hirings in the same columns because they are obviously very negatively correlated. So we're facing multicollinearity at this point. And then in the last column here, normally I don't, in presentation, I don't show the results for the control variables because otherwise that becomes too dense. But here I thought that might be interesting to look at those. And we find out it's not just the level of employment that matters. Now, it's also the change. Now, keep in mind that we have discrete fixed effects, right? So the level here is kind of a change, if I'm clear, because we demean the variable. And the change is actually a change in change because of that fixed effects, okay? But, unemployment matters. That's I think, the takeaway from those two variables. Mean size is positive. Okay, that makes sense. If you have big firms in the neighborhood, you will have more downloads. But what is important or interesting, perhaps, is that the number of local employees matters, and it's very significant to explain the number of local downloads even once you have control for the size of the company. Okay. So that aspect is perhaps something that is not prominent in the literature, that there's a lot of interest at the local level, at least, for financial numbers by presumably employees or people related to employees, right? Their families, whatever. Okay. And then the political uncertainty doesn't seem to matter that much. Okay. So labor, obviously, a big concern when people download 10Ks. All right, so that's essentially what I have, right? So, but to conclude, I would say economic voting is a well-documented empirical finding in political science. You know, in accounting, we kind of looked at that, but there's more limited evidence on whether and how accounting performance affects the electoral process, and whether and how this process affects firms' accounting choices. And I guess I will add a third bullet points given the comments that I just had, and we're perhaps less clear on the benefits that occur after engaging in earnings management. So that's essentially what I have, and I'm more than happy to answer questions that people may have.
Thank you very much, dear Professor Gilles Hilary, for your contribution and your effort. It's really an excellent presentation and excellent paper. Now, if anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your questions. Yeah, Masoud.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you very much for the presentation. One of my PhD students did a good thesis on earnings management, and that brought back some good memories. And that is the reason why I want to ask maybe the first question. Unless I missed it, I didn't hear whether you looked at the choices companies make with regard to whether they use real or accruals earnings management, particularly when there is a major factor like the political connections. So that is my first point, because like I said, unless I missed it, because
Right.
I thought maybe people, so companies do make choices with regard which type of accrual, so which type of earnings management they would adopt. Yeah.
Right. So yes and no. Yes, in the sense that we use a measure of real earnings management, and we did find an effect of the political cycle on real earnings management. No, and maybe we could do this, but we already do a lot in the paper. We did not look at the trade-off, right? So I think that was also the suggestions that we got earlier that maybe that would be interesting to look at. We see that both is happening, but we have not really investigated, when you do more of one time than the other. The previous comment suggesting that maybe the legal decision in 2010 would have an effect there. So we could explore that.
Because there is definitely literature on this, and the literature seems to indicate, obviously the results are never conclusive, if you like, but it seems to, the existing literature seems to indicate that companies with political connections, they favor secrecy, and that's why, particularly if there's like political risk involved and things like this, they favor the costly or the more costly real earnings management instead of the accruals.
Right. So they do both. That I can confirm. How they decide to do one or the other, that we have not investigated.
And if I may, probably one final point. What about other factors? For example, to what extent the firm does or does not have good corporate governance, whether this is a large firm, they're audited by one of these big four, because I thought those factors would probably have an impact on whether companies engage in PEM What do you think?
Right. So a size we do control for governance. We could add more measures at this point. We look at the presence of institutional ownership. But keep in mind that our design has two features. One, we have firm fixed effects in many of the regressions. And so anything that is slow moving, like often governance, is going to be absorbed by the firm fixed effects, right? The second thing is that we look at more the time series than the cross sections, right? So we could use those as partitioning variables, right? But putting them as controls is less likely to matter because remember it's like every 2 years, right? That's the gist of our variation here. Now, whether we should split on those or not, we might have split on governance at some point very early on, but I honestly can't remember what we found, if anything. We could revisit that issue. It's not clear, though, if good governance should help or hurt this behavior, right? On the one hand, you could say, well, you're manipulating numbers, so good governance should prevent that. But at the same time, you're getting a benefit out of that. So maybe boards will be like, yeah, maybe that's the right thing to do. So I'm not sure what we would expect, but potentially we could look at that, yes.
Thank you.
Other questions? Don? Don?
Yeah, thank you. Giles, thank you very much. Don Monk from University of Florida. Thanks for hosting the call and the presentation, Mohammed. I just had a question a little bit about if you could expound a little bit on what it means to be local and this kind of local tie-in, like the distribution of population for the 435 representatives is, of course, equally distributed, but the firms are not within those districts. And I know you do a lot of fixed effects and things like that, but I was just thinking about like a Walmart headquartered in Bentonville and the number of employees they have there compared to the distribution of that, and then, compared to a Target or something like that. And I didn't see anything in the paper, just with some maybe like descriptive statistics as to how the firms are divided within those 435 districts, like, I don't know, by market cap or by something, like kind of to get an understanding of the size and scope of this practice.
Right. So a few things. So definition. So a local firm is local if its headquarters is in the district. Okay. So I live in Arlington. So Boeing would be a local firm.
Right. Like, and so my example of Walmart, that would be Bentonville, Arkansas for them, but Target would be Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Right. So then the next thing is, okay, so maybe in some cases you got 5 people in the headquarters. Does that matter, right? And so that's where the partitioning variable, the split sample analysis that we do based on employment is going to be perhaps relevant, right? So we do show that the effect is stronger, in fact, concentrated in cases where the headquarters is employing a lot of employees locally. If you just have an office and few administrative people there, that doesn't seem to matter as much. Okay, so I think that sort of that's consistent with your intuition, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, in terms of location, I don't have the numbers offhand, but you're going to get the results that you would expect. You got more large firms in LA and New York than in rural, Idaho, right? So I don't know what is the offhand the number of electoral districts that are in our sample. If I had to guess, I would say it's about half, but that's a guess. I don't know if my guess is correct or not.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
If anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your questions. If anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your question. Thank you very much, dear Professor Gilles Hilary, for your contribution and your efforts. And thank you very much, everyone, joined to us today. And thank you very much for taking the time to present to us, dear Professor Gilles. It's have been appreciated. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure, and thank you for everyone for attending and for making suggestions.
Thank you. And I hope to see you soon in Egypt. You are very, very welcome.
All right.
Shukran.
Thanks again.